Welcome to the Todd DeVoe Show, exploring the best ideas and lessons for leaders.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine world. And well, I mean, if you've been listening to anything I've been saying for the last few years, you realize that resiliency and robustness, and as I like to say, anti-fragility for communities is something that's important to me. And so I'm really excited today to have our guest, Andrea Davis, here with the Resiliency Initiative. And oh, hello, Brian. And and also, one thing before we get started, I just wanted everybody to let you know that this segment is brought to you by DLAND, the Buffalo Computer Graphics Disaster Land. And it is a wonderful program for incident management systems. And if you take a look, we had a really great webinar with Tim from DLAND, and you can find it on our YouTube channel as well. But let's bring Andrea into the show.
Hi, Todd.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
So I did a piece a long time ago. Well, I did just a talk, I guess, on anti-fragility and what it means, and because using Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile, and realistically taking a look at what resiliency is and why it's important to build resilient communities. How did you get involved with the concept of resiliency?
Well, first, Todd, I want to say thank you so much for this opportunity to be on your show. I'm a long admirer of yours, so thank you. And I was really excited this was going to be your topic because it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And in resiliency, I know it kind of takes on different meanings to people. And for me, it starts with you as that individual, and it doesn't mean that you can control like the bad day from happening, but it's just making yourself and building up that confidence to be able to weather what's going to come your way, whether on a personal level, whether on a community level. And I started in emergency management way back in 1999. My first crisis was Y2K, because the world was ending at that time, and I knew nothing about the field. I just fell into it. And I feel so fortunate, Todd, that I did, because my whole job was working for a nonprofit in San Francisco, and it was working with other nonprofits and helping them with their resiliency planning, looking at their continuity of operations to make sure that they could, at this time, right, they were really worried that we're going to lose power, internet, everything. Society as we knew it was going to end. But from a planning perspective, that's good for any type of hazard to think about your operations. And it was really cool, one, to get to know all these different services, these different nonprofits through the city, and then just be able to give them this gift of thinking through a bad day and how it would impact them, and then how they would still serve their clients and customers, and typically in very vulnerable populations. And so that's how I got my roots in emergency management. And I just saw the value of that, of just those building blocks of helping these small nonprofits with their plans. Then that builds on it to help the resiliency of the city. And then thinking through like a big hazard that would happen, Y2K thankfully didn't happen, but something like an earthquake, which is a big risk for San Francisco. Having all these plans in place and having these people talk and having these relationships ahead of time before something bad happened was just great for me to see that and see that value, because then when the bad day presents itself, we're that farther along to be able to weather what's going to come our way. And so having kind of that roots, learning that side of emergency management, I'm just really thankful for it, because I took it through all my different jobs that I had. And that's like taking that step back and like helping the communities, whether if I was private sector, where we had a business or an operation in this community, that business would not keep its doors open if that community didn't have plans in place. And thinking, my last employer before I went out on my own, was Walmart. If Walmart didn't have relationships in place with the local communities to get their trucks in a time of crisis, they couldn't get supplies in. They couldn't open that store. They don't have customers then, right? If you don't have a community, you don't have customers. And so this interconnectedness of how supporting just the simple planning side and helping people become resilient, I just think is so powerful, Todd. It's so powerful. And it's simple. It's simple.
It truly is. And when the idea of the robustness or anti-fragility attached with what resiliency is, and the idea is you build back stronger after an event, right? And so we talk about building back to where we were, to normal. And my contention is no. We need to build back stronger to reinforce, to mitigate these issues so they don't happen again. And I think that what you're doing at the Resiliency Initiative is really, singing that song as well. In Y2K, I was in the field when that was going down, and I remember we were all like, we weren't even sure if our MDTs were going to work and all that kind of stuff, and it ended up being a lot of, as we call, live drill, right? And I was thinking everybody should go through the planning process that happened for Y2K. And I think that made a lot of emergency managers stronger emergency managers. And the other day, somebody posted on LinkedIn a story about EMP, and I had another guy who writes for us at the Emergency Management Network wrote a piece on EMP, and my statement was, for those of us that say it can never happen, well, people also said COVID can never happen, right? Or a pandemic. But the idea is, if we plan for that wild, crazy, worst case scenario where nothing is working, the everyday emergency becomes easy.
You can handle it. And if you're just thinking about this absurdity, right? And like, so like I said, Todd, I'm so thankful that was my start, because it was planning for something that, thinking about it now, is absurd. But you're totally right to call out COVID. We were never, any of the planning that went into like pandemic was all focused on staffing loss.
Yeah.
And I remember like having these columns, like 10%, 20%, 50%, like writing all of my different pandemic plans. And so I wrote the plans for the Walt Disney Company. Never did I ever imagine every theme park would be closed around the globe. The cruise ships would be docked. ESPN would have nothing to film. It was much more of a like a Katrina-like catastrophic infrastructure impact, and that was not the planning. That was not the planning done for a pandemic. But if we had just taken a peek at how SARS had impacted Asia, we would have had a better idea of the economic impact that a global pandemic could have. But you're right. It's just like something sometimes shuts off in our brains. It's just like, oh no, we're going to get through this, and then we're going to just keep going forward, and we're just not going to think back. I just want things to be normal, and really not understanding the value of what that crisis just taught us, and the learning. And look at how we work differently now because of COVID, and that, and having these options in my whole company, right? My entire team works at a different location. I wouldn't be able to do that if I thought about the way we used to do business, right? Mm-hmm. That it's old school. I need to be there. I need to be present, and present means I'm face to face with you. And so it's just, I never want to lose that ability of kind of leveraging that bad day of just like, let's not forget these lessons. And yeah, it was traumatic. It was horrible. And we don't want to go back, but why would you want to go back before?
Right.
What's awesome now, right? And then, so we just don't keep repeating, this idea that it's just going to constantly keep happening. And then we see people almost have disaster fatigue and just kind of shut down and think about when they start thinking about disaster planning.
Let's talk about the resiliency aspect of what happened, on 2020. And 2020 has to be, for emergency managers at least, that craziest year that could ever happen in a career. We have, starts off in February, March with COVID coming to the United States. We start doing these, mask mandates. We go, okay, it's only going to be 15 days or whatever, and it keeps moving. And then, of course, George Floyd happens, and then, then we have the summer of violence all over the United States. I don't think any city, major city at least, went untouched by that. So now you're not only are you in a pandemic, you have the civil unrest that's happening across the country. How did we rebound from that? Were we a resilient nation from those two events in 2020?
I actually think, Todd, we're still kind of rebounding from it. And because, if you continue into 2020, we had a hurricane season that went into the Greek alphabet, something we had never seen before. And then we round out that year with the Texas winter ice storms that knocked out, at least in my universe, like 752 Walmarts closed because of those Texas ice storms. It was the largest natural disaster that Walmart had ever responded to. And here's the world's largest retailer. And so I just remember it felt, all of 2020 felt to me, because my first day on the job was January 6, 2020 for me. Yeah, so my crystal ball was off. And so as far as I'm thinking in my head, I've done emergency management response a long time. I'm going from the world's largest entertainment company to the world's largest company. Piece of cake. I've got this. Yeah. I felt so sorely prepared, Todd. One, mainly because I didn't speak retail. My gut instincts, especially from my planner's eyes, were all off. I never would have thought how COVID ended up was what it was going to be. I was in the camp of, it's a couple months at most that we get through this. And then to have to take Walmart's emergency operations, they're 24/7, so that their GSOC, to completely virtual for 2 years, never in a million years would I have thought this. But I think the bounce back is actually still happening, because it was so intense, and I just witnessing just on my team on individual levels, and then all the personal stuff everybody's dealing with, and especially anybody who had little ones at home that just joined the workforce, right? Because we included them in our Zooms, is that we haven't, I feel like, as a culture yet, been able to really digest what we learned and to be able to be resilient to the next step. Because I think in some respects, Todd, people are still going through it. And they can't, it took me the longest time. And of course, I've left the company subsequently, but it took me the longest time to get out of this. What's next? When's the alien invasion? I couldn't switch to because the normal wasn't normal, right? We weren't going back to the office. We weren't going back to the way things were, nor that I think that we should, but I couldn't get back to my okay. And that's one of the drivers, I would say, Todd, to why I wanted to kind of go back to my roots and be working with nonprofits and small businesses to help them see that path forward to resiliency, because I was really struggling, Todd, struggling to get back.
This other thing too on the retail side, in which we didn't mention, was the whole supply chain issues that came out, and then the grocery stores are empty, and I went to a Rite Aid, and nothing against it. I don't think it was just Rite Aid, but this happened where I went, and they actually shortened their store. They put shelves up so you couldn't, because they had not enough stuff to put on the shelves, that they brought their shelves forward and shortened their store from where it was at. I found that kind of interesting as well on that solution. As an emergency manager, I was always concerned about the small business. I always thought the Target, the Walmart,
we're okay. Yeah.
You're going to be okay, but it was Main Street, small mom and pop shops, and working with the Chamber of Commerce to get preparedness stuff out to them. I thought that was always critical, and I'm glad that your organization is working on that. How has been the reception from those small businesses to saying, hey, I don't have the money, I don't have the insurance, whatever that their excuse is, not to do it, because it's easier not to do it than it is to do it?
Well, I try to, at least my approach has been I'm talking to my dad. He had a mom and pop diner where I grew up in small, Redding, California is where I grew up. And He had a diner for 20 years, and we were lucky to have a fire extinguisher if the grill caught on fire. So there was no like emergency preparedness or continuity of operations. And my dad always talks about like if COVID had hit when he had the diner, that he would have gone bankrupt, that we would have gone out of business. And that I think that is indicative of a lot of small businesses. They saw, and some of them actually have not opened their doors post COVID because they couldn't pivot to whatever the business operations were. I found through COVID, because I was so fortunate to have some friends, help me with the Resiliency Initiative and work with small businesses, that they reached out saying, we need help. It was a small dance studio in Southern California saying, what do we do? How can we stay in business when the county's shutting us down? And just to think, so how can we offer virtual dance lessons? Like it's never been done before, but how can we think that through? And so I have found that it's very receptive, that small business are receptive to it. But when you're dealing with like a mom and pop shop that has like 2 people that work for it, and they're working 16-hour days just to keep their doors open, trying to convince them to do the standard way of planning, like how we know to go through and do a thorough, continuity plan or emergency plan, and then test it. It can fall on deaf ears because it's overwhelming. And so where I've found the most success is actually just saying, it's not about the actual plan. It's about the process. It's like sitting down with your team and let's just think this through, and make it something so simple, and that could happen to any one of us. Like you just lose power. We just lose power right now. How are we going to continue this podcast? And just helping them think that way, and then just trying to connect them with resources that are free. I mean, you can go into ready.gov and download a plan, but unless you fill it out, it's not gonna do you any good. And so I'm hoping to provide just connecting the dots to help people. And this is obviously passion for me. I am not going to be a millionaire doing this. That's my intention. I found that with starting a company as opposed to a nonprofit, I had a lot more flexibility in how I could spend my money and focus on certain projects, especially internationally. And so I've found a lot of just like good feeling, like being able to say, hey, I know someone right down the street that does this for a living and will give you this plan for free, and just let me connect that dot for you. Or even with local jurisdictions, I think that there's such a sentiment like, oh, you can get FEMA grant dollars to pay for your plans. But if that local jurisdiction is one person, one emergency manager for everything, they may not have that skill set to write the grant application, to go through that process. They may not meet whatever the specific standards are. And so then this community of 10,000 people could go without a plan because they just don't have the capacity. And so just to be able to just say, well, hey, I can do that. This is a skill set I love and enjoy. Let me see how I can help you do that. And I think it's just presenting a path forward, because I think sometimes it's just insurmountable to people, especially if you're just trying to get your doors open.
Yes, absolutely.
It's so hard. It has to be like brushing your teeth, and it just make it that way. And sometimes we emergency managers haven't been that great at selling it as something. We say it's a have to do, you must do it or you're going to die. Well, that just makes somebody shut down, right? At the end of the day. And that's not adding value. But sitting down with somebody and saying, hey, let's just think about what we would do in a situation. I see an acupuncturist, and she's a one-woman show, and she's in a little shopping center. And I hate to have these thoughts, but when I have all these needles in me, I'm like, what in the heck would I do if there was an active shooter situation? And I asked her, I'm like, have you thought through an active shooter situation? I, of course, knew the answer, right? But then subsequently, we sat there and like, okay, let's figure out, what would we do? How would we help patients? I mean, something as simple as that. And no, we sat down and wrote a plan? No, we didn't, but we thought about the process.
You bring up active shooter and the small business and the unfortunate experience that I had when I responded to an active shooter was at a beauty salon in a small retail space. with 2 restaurants on either side of it, you know, and it was during lunchtime, and you know, I mean, and upstairs there were doctors' offices and things like this, you know, so yeah, I mean, even, you know, even if it's, as we called it, Mayberry by the Sea, you know, you have to have those plans for all these type of events. And you know, one of the users, or one of the users, because it says LinkedIn user, I don't see your name, sorry. It says, I think resiliency starts with small business, and I think you're absolutely right. You know, there was a city, and I want to say it was, oh man, it was Northern California, and I forget the name of it. And for whatever city, if you guys are listening, I apologize for not using your name. One of their plans they had for post-earthquake resiliency initiative, for lack of using your name, is to put out in the park circus type tents, and to be able to bring the businesses into that, and supported with security and all that kind of stuff, to be able to keep the shops open. Because if you think about, you know, an ice cream shop, for instance, small mom and pop ice cream shop, you know, if they don't have electricity, you know, they lose their entire inventory, you know, and they may never recover from that. And most businesses, if they don't reopen their doors within 3 business days, they're never going to open again. You know, and I think what you're doing with small businesses is commendable, and is very well needed. I'm looking at this other thing. It says we're doing planning and preparedness training exercises in the 1980 with elements that we call resiliency. Would you consider new and not rebranding? Do you consider new and not rebranding? Not really sure where you're going with that question. Are you saying that resiliency is an old concept and that we're rebranding? If you, Facebook user, if you want to weigh back in on that question, because I want to just kind of make sure that we're answering your question correctly. No, and I'll take this for a second, and Andrea, I'll give it to you. I don't think the concept of resiliency is new at all. It was really founded in ecology in the 1970s, 1973 to be exact, with the idea of organisms to go in under stress, were able to rebound in the ecological standard and to come back to be normal or sometimes better. And we adopted that concept as community back, you know, maybe in the 80s, maybe even before, the idea of resilient communities, you know. Okay, so he wants to know what the new elements in what you're doing are. It's a good question.
It is a great question, because I actually kind of agree that it's been around a long time, and I think that how we started it out, Todd, is like resiliency does mean different things to different people, and how it's being branded is differently. How I've been pushing it is just really giving yourselves the tools, for whatever it's on a personal level or on a business level, to be able to keep going after something happens. And that something is whatever you define it as, because it could be the simple, as you said, for the ice cream shop losing their power, to the major big bad day that we all experienced with the pandemic. But as far as new elements, I wouldn't say there are specific new ones, other than as far as considerations. I think as a collective emergency management community, we've gotten much better at considering the idea of whole community, making sure that small businesses are part of our plans, and it's not just a government focus, that we have an eye to our functional and accessible needs communities, that we're looking at making sure, like from a language standpoint, how we're communicating to all of our different audiences. And so I think that the planning process is getting more accessible. We always have to have an eye to that to keep moving forward. But as far as new elements, and I can't really think of something very specific, other than just making sure that we're reaching all the different communities with the principles of resiliency.
And I think one of the things that we've done poorly in the past as emergency managers, and I'm speaking for myself, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, is that we looked at the idea of emergency management as the government entity. You know, even when we take a look at FEMA, we're looking at public assistance, which is, you know, really just for infrastructure in the government. You know, individual assistance is always this thing that we go, okay, well, they'll deal with it over here. And we forget that in cases of businesses, or not businesses, as government, is it's not just people and homes is those small businesses that really keep us running. And the majority of tax base is the small business, right? Walmarts and Targets and Home Depots and Lowe's, they're great to have in your community because of the tax base. But at the end of the day, if you lost all those small businesses, you're not going to be able to function.
You don't have a community if you
Right.
don't have the small businesses. I mean, just think about just anywhere where anybody lives, right? Without your restaurants and your coffee shops and the place where you go make copies, or in just the little country store. I mean, it just like it's the heartbeat of all of our communities around the globe, and that to me is where we need to invest and to shore up, because we saw it during COVID. I mean, it just, yeah, and you're right. I mean, like when you mentioned, like, you weren't worried about the big dogs, the Walmarts, the Targets, because they had a need, right? They have people on staff. Small businesses they don't. And like, since the age of 10, I was waitress, pie girl, like anything you could think of at my dad's restaurant, other than the cook. He was the cook. And so, but you take one of us gets sick, we don't open for the day.
Yeah.
And it's thinking that through, that 99% of our economy is run by small businesses. That's a vulnerability that we need to look at as emergency managers, and making sure they got a seat at this table,
Right.
when we're talking about our community planning.
And I think for emergency managers out there listening to this, I think your first step, if you're looking for that, is to really build that relationship with your chamber of commerce or your business development organization. And I think that's realistically working through them, and it becomes a collective, if you will, for people that are looking for emergency planning, that they can go to and work together, because they're already paying dues. So they're gonna be interested in hearing what they have to say, and reach out to them and ask to see if you can speak at one of their events. Go to the Rotary clubs, to the Kiwanis clubs, and to things like this, to speak to the local businessmen and women that are out there, making a difference every day. And I think that's the critical. And reach out to Andrea Davis and see how she can help out with helping your community as well. I want to give you a little bit of time here to sort of pitch what you're doing, and so people want to get a hold of you. So, this is a fairly new venture for you. I'm excited for you that you're doing this. What are your goals and objectives, and how do people work with you?
Sure. Thank you, Todd. And thanks everybody for listening in. And so as you said, Todd, this is new. This was not on my vision board to start my own company. But in April of this year, I left Walmart, corporate America, to go out on this venture. I had an opportunity to work with the United Nations on their disaster risk conference, which was in Bali, Indonesia. It was really tough spending 20 days in Indonesia and Bali to help out with that conference. But I felt it was a sign from the universe. One, I was absolutely exhausted from 3 years of dealing with COVID and being at the helm at Walmart for emergency management. And I really felt this calling to go back to my roots. And so the Resiliency Initiative, my team is completely virtual. We're in different locations around the United States. Home base. I'm from native California girl. It's a California company. And Lorraine, my executive director, she's down in Southern California. And so I would say that's like our global headquarters, for lack of better words. But we specialize in working with small communities and small businesses. And right now we kind of have a diverse set of clients. We're working with a Native American tribe, and we're working with a small business franchise, which has global locations, and then a conservation authority group as well, and some nonprofits. And so it's been a great kind of leap of faith, going back into my kind of my planning roots and being able to support. And then I've been able to leverage the relationships I developed traveling for Disney internationally. And we're working with the Resilient Foundation, which is based in India, that supports rural tribal schools in just simple emergency preparedness. And so the Resiliency Initiative is actually funding 5 schools to receive this training, and they're elementary school age kids, and just to learn life safety measures and emergency preparedness, because they're in the areas that they are, so rural and don't have a lot of community resources for them. And so flash flooding can come and just literally wipe out communities, and hundreds of kids actually die each year. And so just making this investment to get these kids the vital training so they'll take it home to their parents, and then working with the schools to help the schools like with their own resiliency and thinking about some mitigation measures to keep the schools safe. And so that's where my heart is, right? To be able to like parlay whatever little profits I've got into kind of supporting some of these nonprofit ventures. And to me, that's how you pay it forward, and that's how you make a resilient world, right? Because you've got to go to the heart of where we have, the most vulnerable and who need this and don't have resources or access to them.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing that work, because I think that's very important, And how do people find you?
Most of my website is just theresiliencyinitiative.com. I'm Andrea at theresiliencyinitiative.com. You can email me, and I'm very present on LinkedIn. You can find me, just Andrea Davis. Just hit DM me or send me an email. If I'm traveling, sometimes I'm a little delayed, but I'd love to talk with you and chat with you. I can talk about this all day long, as Todd knows.
Yeah, I really appreciate you and what you're doing, and taking that leap of faith in April and creating your own organization. And for those of you that have not reached out or found it, take a look at what the Resiliency Initiative is doing, especially some of their nonprofit work. I think it's critical, and that we need to have more of this and not less of this. So I appreciate you, Andrea.
Thank you, Todd, so much.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon. And it's a pleasure to bring this information to you. And Disaster Land, D-Land from Buffalo Computer Graphics has stepped up to sponsor these shows, and I'm really excited to be working with them as well. Hey, if you would like more information about Andrea Davis, please check her out. The show and the links in the show notes below. I think it's definitely worth your time and effort to check what the work is being done. And everybody, I really hope that you stay safe and stay hydrated.